Independent panel believes President Cyril Ramaphosa may have a prima facie case to answer for regarding the farm burglary. The report found holes in the president's version of events. Let's unpack this further with political analyst Sanusha Naidu. Sanusha, thank you so much for your time this evening. Before we get to that report, I want to start off with a decision today by the NEC to adjourn their meeting and first have this report processed by ANC officials. And by officials, we're assuming that Treasurer Paul Mashatile meant the top six. However, in this sense, the top six are the top three. We're presuming that President Cyril Ramaphosa, as he did today, excuse himself from the NEC, will excuse himself from any meeting of the top six to discuss this as it concerns him. Secretary General Ace Magashule is suspended. We don't know whether he will partake. And unfortunately, the Deputy Secretary General, Jessie Duarte, is no longer with us. No doubt she would have brought some straight shooting common sense to such discussions. However, we are left then with Deputy President David Mabuza, Treasurer Paul Mashatile, National Chairperson Gwede Mantashe, and then uncertainty about whether Ace Magashule will take part in those discussions. What do you expect them to do, and what is meant by processing?
Good evening, Anili. Good evening to your viewers. I think what's really interesting about the adjournment of today's special NEC meeting, and then listening to the insert as well as to the brief press interaction that the TG and the spokesperson did outside of the venue, suggests to me that due process was not followed. So in other words, processing in terms of protocol procedures that need to be followed when such a report had to go through the kind of deliberation and structural deliberation of the party. So in other words, it goes to the top six. And then, of course, it has to go to, from there, it goes to the NWC, and then the NWC then deliberates over it, interrogates the report, and then from there, it goes to the NEC. So what this suggests to me is that I think the situation was overwhelming. Somehow they missed steps in the procedure that needed to be followed in terms of protocol, and now they're going back and they kind of retracing their steps in terms of protocol processes and procedures. Now, at this point in time, it's the ANC officials that make up the NWC, and they are going to be looking at this report, looking at it from all angles, looking at it in terms of all of the implications, all of the possible trajectories that could emerge, and finally then going to the NEC and saying, this is what we have, this is how we have interpreted this, and these are the implications this will have. So obviously, there's a lot that's happening. It's very overwhelming, but it also suggests that in terms of process procedures, the ANC now needs to also be very careful and be very, very clear and coherent around how it goes about processing this report before the 6th of December, as the TG had said. But again, it also did, in my opinion, it kind of exposes the dilemma and the predicament the ANC finds itself in as well, together with the president.
There seems to be a bit of scrambling. No doubt the last 72 hours have been a whirlwind for everybody involved, and there is likely to be scrambling. That's not strange. However, we have to look at the events unfolding quite carefully to try and draw some sense of the direction it's heading in. Firstly, what do you make of the president not attending today's NEC meeting? He has been criticized. However, others have said, well, we understand his reasoning.
Yeah, it's a difficult one to call. I think if you are the subject of a discussion and it is as sensitive and as critical as you rightly point out, and it's dealing with your fate in terms of whether you how they're going to interpret this recommendation, what's going to happen in terms of the process then going forward to both internally in the party, the decision that the party has to make from the executive level, and that then gets communicated to how that then plays out in Parliament in terms of the debate, and then of course the vote with regard to adopting of the report. I mean, it's difficult for you to be in the room and hear the things that you have to hear about yourself, and people, and you are the subject of that debate and that inquiry and that discussion. And I don't know how you would feel, or how I would feel actually listening to all of this and thinking, what do I do? So I think, on one level, he is the president of the party. He is the head of the top six. And, technically, should he be there in terms of process procedure? But at the same time, would he then, by being there, would there be a level in which there's a sense of how does he deal with it? So it's one that I think it just depends where you sit on the spectrum on this. And in my opinion, I'm not sure how I would feel sitting in a room like that.
There's been a lot made of the president's decision. Yesterday, there were reports of him possibly wanting to resign, followed by an announcement that he would address the nation. And the expectation was very much that he would resign. A lot of comment from various corners saying, well, yes, President Cyril Ramaphosa, you need to do the right thing for the country. But how does one even begin to know at this stage what that is?
It's like playing roulette, and you just don't know whether it's where that ball is going to fall. I mean, the right thing to do, in terms of, it's a report, it's a recommendation, it still has to go through processes in Parliament. It's in that context, and of course then there's the internal process in the party. But I think what for me was a more significant issue is, even if it was a decision to say that I'm taking this under advisement, I mean, listening to the spokesperson's brief yesterday of how the president is approaching this and how he's ventilating this and interpreting it and looking at it in all different ways, understanding what the implications are, even if it was about I'm digesting everything, just to come out there and have him appear before the South African nation, to even say that, I think for me personally, would have been something to say, you know what, he's taking us into his confidence about how he's feeling, etc. Nobody has seen him since. We thought and that comes back to the previous question you raised about not going to the NEC meeting today, but also, nobody is able to see him physically. And I think that's in terms of the South African public. But I think that again tells us that there needs to be a better communication strategy to the South African public. And depending what you say, what the situation is and how they're dealing with it in terms of PR and damage control and all of that strategy that they need to think about, I would have felt that it would have been much more in his interest to have said, let me go out there and be bold enough to be as bold as I normally used to be with the family meetings, and go out there and just have another one, even if people feel that I must resign and that everybody's entitled to their opinion, and the court of public opinion is vast and expansive and it has all kinds of dynamics to it. But let me just go out there and make my position known, and this is what I'm doing. And I think this is where, again, optics is very important.
Sanusha, given that very obviously, in the wake of the release of that report, some members of the ANC want Cyril Ramaphosa gone. Does he stand a chance of political survival? We're not even talking about the legalities of it here. We're just talking about, should he decide not to resign, to stay on, to take the report under review, does he have a chance of political survival at this stage?
Again, it's really tough, because yesterday the impression and the perception was that address to the nation was going to be about him saying, I'm going to remove myself from office. In fact, the perception was, and the media reports were, that he wanted to resign. And then he was advised to be less hasty and to be to give more ventilation, to give more thought to the whole thing. And I think this is where it catches us out as well in terms of trying to actually be in the mind of the president. I'm not sure whether we can be in anyone's mind to know what they're doing, what they're feeling, how they're going to move forward. And I don't think any one of us want to be in his shoes, or personally to be in his shoes right now and to make that decision in terms of what his political survival will be like moving forward. But let me also make this open up this debate or this caveat to the point of if his political survival is one that he is compelled to think about the options, and if indeed he says, I want to leave, I think it's also a dilemma and a predicament for the party, because then there's also the question of, have they actually got somebody who could move forward in the party? And I know we've talked about in terms of his moving into the position of president of the party and then, of course, president of the republic. And I know we've spoken about the deputy president and who will come in and so forth. But I think the party is facing a predicament. I mean, the fact of the matter is the 2024 election is not that far off. If you're going to think about that very critically, there's also the other perception in the public domain, and that is on certain news shows, in certain radio shows, callers have been saying, well, it's better the devil we know than the devil we don't know, and that's quote unquote. And I think this again demonstrates and it illustrates the level of trust deficit that the party is dealing with in terms of even having to deal with the fact that there's a crisis in terms of the president and how it's going to happen. But then if he does go, what is it going to do to the party?
Well, thank you very much for sharing your thoughts with us. That was political analyst Sanusha Naidu.